Madam Recording Secretary, are we ready to begin? We're ready.
Yes, Chair Vega, the meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the April 11th, 2024 Santa Ana Police Oversight Commission regular meeting to order. The time is 5:04 p.m. This meeting is taking place with in-person attendance at City Hall in the council chambers. The public can also watch the meeting online via the Santa Ana YouTube channel or the city's website. Madam Recording Secretary, can you please conduct the roll call?
Thank you, Chair Vega. Commissioner Castillo-Latin,
Here.
Commissioner Goransky,
Here.
Commissioner Mejia,
Present.
Commissioner Said,
Here, thank you.
Commissioner Perea. Noting for the record, Commissioner Perea is absent. Vice Chair Carpenter,
Here.
Chair Vega.
Here. Thank you. I will now lead us into the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody could please stand. Right hand over your heart. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so moving on to public comments. Now is the time for the commission to receive comments from the public on agenda and non-agenda items pursuant to the Brown Act. The commission may not enter into discussion at this time. Speakers will have 3 minutes for their comments. Madam Recording Secretary, is there anyone that wishes to speak in person?
Chair Vega, we do not have any speakers for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, we're going to the consent calendar. Item 1 is the regular meetings of March 14th, 2024 of the Police Oversight Commission. The recommended action is to approve the minutes. Would any commissioner like to make a motion to approve the minutes of that meeting?
I'll make the motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Vice Chair Carpenter and seconded by Commissioner Goransky.
Motion to approve the minutes moved by Vice Chair Carpenter, seconded by Commissioner Goransky. Commissioner Castillo-Latin.
Yes.
Commissioner Goransky.
I'm lost. Are we passing, approving again?
Yes. Commissioner Mejia.
Yes.
Commissioner Perea. Noting for the record, Commissioner Perea is absent. Commissioner Said.
Yes, thank you.
Vice Chair Carpenter.
Yes.
Chair Vega.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0, 1 absent, Commissioner Perea.
Thank you. That's the end of the consent calendar, and now we're moving on to a staff presentation. Item 2 is budget community engagement. Who will be presenting that? Hi. Oh, so 1 second.
Sorry. I'm here to get recommendations for improving and expanding community engagement on the budget process, as well as to hear what's important to you in terms of your budget priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. But instead of boring you by me doing all the talking, and I'm used to seeing people's eyes glaze over when we talk budget, I'm going to show you a brief 4-minute video that provides you a general overview of the budget, and then I'll chime back in.
The City of Santa Ana wants to hear from you. We need your help to decide how to spend your tax dollars and which city services to prioritize in our new budget. The City Council adopts a budget each year to provide services to our community of more than 300,000 residents and 30,000 businesses. The budget is simply a plan for spending city revenue over the next fiscal year. The fiscal budget year is July 1st through June 30th. The current budget of $870 million provides police, fire and ambulance services, street and park maintenance, library services, water and sewer service, programs for the unhoused community, and more. Funding for these services comes from taxes, fees, and allocations from county, state, and federal governments. Slightly more than half of the funding sources are restricted, meaning the city can only spend the money on specific services such as affordable housing or street improvements. The remainder of funding is unrestricted, meaning the city can spend the money on any city service such as public safety, library services, and parks and recreation programs. During the annual budget process, the City Council focuses on the unrestricted money accounted for in the city's general fund. The primary sources of revenue in the general fund are property taxes and sales taxes. For each dollar of property tax that you pay, the city receives approximately 19 cents, with the remaining portion going to countywide services and schools. If you shop or dine in Santa Ana, you pay 9.25% sales tax. The city receives 1% of the normal allocation, plus 1.5% for voter-approved Measure X. Measure X pays for 22% of the general fund budget. This important revenue source has helped the city retain and add police officers, provide services to the unhoused community, and address the effects of homelessness in the city's right-of-way. Measure X has also been used to build and maintain parks, provide youth services, improve the Santa Ana Regional Transportation Center, repair fire stations, and remove graffiti. In just 5 years, the city will lose $30 million of this important revenue source when the Measure X rate decreases from 1.5% to 1%. The tax goes away completely in 2039. The city currently has a balanced budget, meaning recurring revenue is sufficient to pay for recurring services. In the upcoming fiscal year, we expect it to be more difficult to balance the budget. The city's cost for labor, construction materials, and supplies are increasing faster than the city's revenue sources. More than ever, we need your opinion to help the city focus on the services our residents need. There are multiple ways for you to participate. Attend a city council meeting and offer your public comment. Complete the city's budget priorities survey. You can do so by filling out a paper survey, online, or even on your cell phone. Use the city's online tool to balance the budget, or select your priorities. It's easy and fun. For more information on the budget, scan the QR code you see today, visit the city's website, or email the budget team. The City of Santa Ana prides itself on financial transparency. More information is located at the city's website. Here you'll find the current fiscal year's budget in detail, prior year budgets, annual financial reports, and more. Thank you for caring about your city's budget. Your opinion counts.
If I may interrupt you real quick, I just want to state for the record that Commissioner Perea is now present. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure, not a problem. So we're wrapping up what I like to call the listening tour of the budget process phase. We have conducted all of our community budget meetings where we visited in every ward. We have attended a couple of citywide events, and we're also doing like informal focus groups with various nonprofits as they reached out to us. So what we're doing is we're taking all this information in, like what I call like just gathering it all in, and we're going to compile this feedback and share it with City Council. It's going to happen in 2 separate phases. The first will be shared at the first council meeting in May, on May 7th in summary form. The collection window for the survey and our simulation tools close at 12:01 a.m. on May 13th. We will compile all the responses and share with council. Council will get a detailed version of every single response we received when we share with them the final results. The final results, since when the survey closes on May 13th, we'll compile it. We'll again present it to council in summary form, but we will also give council members the actual file that has all, hopefully more than 2,000 responses. We were tasked with 20,000. I don't think we're going to achieve that this year. We're about 1,500 and a month to go. But the reason I'm here is for you all to help to get more people involved in the process. And so we're asking questions like, how can we get people more involved in the process? Do you have any feedback for me on things we can do to help folks get more involved? Yes, ma'am.
This flyer that we received, has it been mailed to residents?
We did. We mailed it. I think it went out the beginning of March, beginning of April. You guys didn't. This is good to know because we spent a lot of money mailing this out, and if nobody saw it, it's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I think most people don't check their mail.
Yeah,
that's just
we've heard that too.
And I think people sometimes are overwhelmed with work, et cetera. But I think one thing, especially given that the city has several community events, I'm assuming you're probably already doing this, but having focus groups there and conducting the survey, I think, or like in spaces like parks where people use that as like evenings, things where families usually join, like not people who are normally involved, because we will already do that on our own, but people who are normally not involved, which usually are people who are using public spaces.
So this is what we do at city events. We set up a table, and then we bribe parents to come over and talk to us by like giving their kids something to do while they're taking the survey. And so we are so bummed when the Excellent Adventure was pretty much rained out, but we're going to be at Dia de los Niños. We'll be at the Fun Run. So we'll have a busy day to get that, and then take advantage of things like the brew at the zoo and the first, the resident Sunday at the zoo, those types of things. But we are trying to make budget community engagement a year-round process. And so people are used to us, and I'm not always just hitting them up once a year in February and March.
One more idea, perhaps contacting HOAs for communities that have them. And that way the president can then spread the message
Right.
to the residents.
Thank you. We have been working with planning and building their neighborhood initiatives and worked with some of the neighborhood associations. The ones that I've been able to successfully get in contact with, they've been wonderful. And most of our attendance at the community budget forums have been because of the neighborhood associations. So yes, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation as well. I did receive them via mail, so
Oh, yay! That's one person.
I do like to check my mail a lot. The question I had, has the city, I know that it was promoted in the city's social media, different social media channels, but has the city done social media ads for particularly reaching the younger population in Instagram
Right.
and then Facebook?
I can always tell when we do a push on Instagram because I get that morning email that says, we completed, you received X amount of responses. And so something happened yesterday because today I got 97 responses. So I'm guessing that was social media. And so, yeah, we're doing that. And we found that to be how we get the biggest bang for our buck.
So was that through a regular posting or through a targeted ad?
Oh, I thought it was through Instagram.
Okay.
Usually when I'm scrolling, that's where I see it. Oh, you know what? We did have we had our last community budget meeting at Fisher Park. So usually in advance of the meeting, they'll let everybody know. So maybe that's what happened.
Okay, yeah, because I think definitely so paying for social media ads tends to
Oh,
pay
social
off.
media ads. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Let me write that down.
Do you also attend the mobile home parks?
No.
Oh, you should, because
Okay.
they always want to know why they're ignored. We finally accepted them into the Comlink organization quite a few years ago because they kept saying, we don't get the protection you keep talking about. So there's quite a few of them around town.
Okay. I will research
Think about
that. Yeah, our goal is to cast as wide net as possible to find anyone. So that's why I'm here. Anybody else?
First, I want to thank you, staff, for the presentation and for bringing it to the commission. I appreciate staff really doing everything possible to get this information out there and encouraging the public to participate in something that is so important. One thing that relates to this commission is what's the budget for this commission? How much is set aside for the Police Oversight Commission?
I will have to, I don't know what it is exactly right now. I believe it started off around $500,000, and so I'd have to follow up to see. I know there is one management analyst for the Police Oversight Commission. I will defer to Daniel to talk about the status of that position. I don't know. And I know there's money for the independent director oversight and those types of functions, but specific dollars, I'll have to research and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Do any commissioners have additional comments?
Okay, one other thing. Is there anything particularly you want emphasized in the budget that we can write and take with us and add it to the file? Yes, ma'am.
According to the survey, I think it highlighted road repairs. Is that what you're asking about? Okay.
Specifically, yeah, specific items.
So graffiti removal and road repairs, because where I live, the roads, it's like I'm off-roading every single day I leave to come here, go to work. The roads are really bad where I live.
Okay.
Graffiti removal, same thing. Seems like a person is stuck in our neighborhood and it's, they graffiti the neighborhood, the next day the city comes out to paint it, and it's like this repetitive cycle that just doesn't stop.
Okay. Can I give you my business card and then you can send me specifically what those streets are
Of course.
as well? Okay. I'll get that to you before I go.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think for me, more programs first for the youth,
Okay.
especially given that I know there's like a lot of summer camps, but they might not be fully funded. And even though there's like a small fee for some people. That fee can be a lot for other parents. So I think having more free activities would be helpful, and having like a scale system as
Like
well.
ability to pay?
Yeah, so
Okay.
like for instance, there's a couple of programs that I've seen, I think like karate or things like that, that might be $100 for the summer. And for some parents that is like a steal compared to other programs, but then for some parents, that's a lot. And so that can prevent some parents from joining. So I'm just thinking that if there could be free programs where
Okay,
parents
sure.
can actually have their children in the summer or during the year. And then for your investing crime reduction programs, a lot of the crime reduction programs that are proven to actually work are reducing poverty. So I think thinking about how to reshape and how do we rethink about that, right? So improving whether it's economic development, jobs, youth, young transition. So thinking through those terms.
Okay,
I would
got it.
highly encourage that.
Thank you.
I have one recommendation, that we don't move forward, or we no longer do the ice skating rink
Okay,
every year.
okay, noted.
Yeah, I have code enforcement, I think is really important because it prevents the broken window syndrome, which the police are very familiar with. I think we could also cut back on a lot of the parties that the city's throwing, given that we're looking at a structural deficit. I think that the citizens are better served by services, i.e. police, street repair, sewer, water, those type of things. So those are my priorities.
Great, thank you.
It'd be great to spend more money on parks, specifically dog parks in the city. I think we have one that's opening, but that might be the only one in the city. There are parks in the city of Santa Ana that I think could benefit from a dog park. So if
Okay.
that's something that could be considered, thank
Yep.
you.
Anything else?
I have a couple things, but first, thank you for coming to the commission and asking for input. I really appreciate that. I know that I was watching the previous council meeting and hearing the report and kind of like where we are going to be in a couple of years as well financially. And in those, what I did like and I would like to emphasize is Councilmember Fan proposed the idea of a bond for libraries, parks. And I think that will be very important. I think when the spirit of Measure X, when it was being presented, is that it was going to improve the infrastructure of our city and also maintain the level of programming that we were having for young people and green areas. So I do believe that the city exploring the idea of a bond, particularly just for parks, and libraries, that will be great. I think that when we start looking at structural, at the cuts that are going to have to be made 3-4 years down the road, usually the first things to go are those type of services. And so I think that we have a very beautiful Santa Ana that has been in the progress for the last couple of years, and so I think that that's important to maintain. The other one item that I think will be worth discussing, whether it's in a presentation or maybe for the police commission to consider discussing down the road, is when it relates to the police department, seeing the last 10 to 12 years of the budget of the police, and also comparing it to crime statistics of the city, to do some assessment on what's working and what's not working. And also, I know that we had several different crime prevention programs that the council has funded over the last 3 years. And so we'll be very curious as well to see whether those also have contributed to reduction of crime. I think that from my end, sometimes putting a lot of money into a department might not be the solution. I think really rethinking and looking at what's working. The other one, which is more like perhaps like a specific financial question, I know that for example, in LA and other cities, they're having an issue with overspending from certain departments. I'm not sure if that's an issue that we have in Santa Ana, if there's departments that have overspended throughout the last years, and where we can start looking into where we need to cut back, or we need to be a little bit more moderate in our spending. So if there's some type of report on that will be helpful.
Right now, we have in our ERP system, it's called Budget Edits. And what that does is if you are entering like a requisition or something like that, and you have exceeded your budget, it will not let you enter that. There are times where we lift the edits for there's always an exception for something. But so yes, and that does help us manage our budgets. We manage at the cost center level and not at the specific account number level in the city.
Are we able to get more information and kind of like in the spirit of what's working, what's not working? I know I'm all on board with programs. I do remember taking my daughters to one of these programs, and some of these classes are there's like no attendance at all for certain classes that are available during the summer. And so maybe that's something that we can reassess, like, do we need this class again next summer because we had no one attending them? And
Right.
maybe boost another popular program that we just didn't have enough seats available because so many people were interested.
Sure.
Maybe kind of focus on the more popular programs that kids want to be a part of.
So the higher education in me says that's a program evaluation. So are we doing programs evaluation? And I'm writing that down to follow up with parks, because I'm sure they're doing some kind of, cost benefit analysis. But yeah, that's what I hear. Program evaluation is good. And I heard you talk about linking budget to program outcomes. Okay, got that as well.
The other thing that I wanted to express support for is the Immigrant Defense Fund, maintaining that. I do, however, want to flag, and this is something I'll come personally at the next council meeting to flag to the council, is I know that in 2 years ago, some of us that work with immigrant refugee communities ask around the ensuring that other communities are being served, particularly Vietnamese refugees. And there's a recent report that through my work we just released that shows that Vietnamese refugees are also very impacted by deportation and detention. And so now this is an issue that we have brought to the council previously, and looking into how that program can best serve those communities. And so I think that that's something that I will definitely flag to the city council to look into. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more comment.
Okay.
I would like to have a different perspective on the code enforcement. And this is something that actually, in my short time with the Community Development Commission, that I brought up, in that a lot of the core enforcement practices penalize people who can't afford to make certain improvements. And I know there are programs, right? I recall, I don't know if they're still going to continue, like a fund for homeowners or to do home improvement. So I think I encourage, instead of citations, having more knowledge about how to improve homes, because a lot of times it's not a choice for some people. And so being mindful that creating more citations creates a cycle of poverty for people who can't afford it. And we're trying to solve a problem, and that's not solving the problem. So having access to the resources.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, well then I will let you get to it, and I'll drop off my business card. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, that concludes staff presentations, and now we're moving on to a work study. So item 3 is training for the Santa Ana Police Oversight Commission, the history, principles, role, and function of the civilian oversight of law enforcement, and a review of the Santa Ana ordinance and applicable authorities. Presented by Tina Barr.
Good evening, everyone. Give me a moment to get my screen sharing going. Okay. I believe you all can see the screen right now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So first of all, I do want to thank you all for inviting Nicole and myself to attend the meeting and provide some information about civilian oversight of law enforcement. I know that Santa Ana has been working on this for a number of years, and so it's exciting times that the board is here and you all have started getting into the work, the business of civilian oversight. And all that's required for your city. I also understand that you all have had quite a bit of training already. And so I hope that what I cover tonight provides a little more information specifically related to civilian oversight. And so I do want to start with saying just a very brief information about myself. So I am Tina Barr, and I am NACOL's Director of Training and Education. I started working with NACOL back in August of last year. And prior to that, I was a professor of social work and was introduced to civilian oversight probably 5 or 6 years ago when I lived in North Carolina. And I worked with some community members who, like myself, believed there was a need for civilian oversight in the city in which we lived. And so I worked for a couple years with a grassroots organization to spearhead the efforts to get an ordinance passed that allowed a civilian review board to be put into place. So I bring this up because we all have arrived at civilian oversight from different paths. And so when I was working on the issue in the city where I was, I got to become very familiar with what it takes in order to get an ordinance established and commissions and boards specifically. It wasn't until I started working with NACOL that I realized, oh my gosh, there's so much that I don't know. And so tonight, I'm going to cover some information that you may very well already know. And I'm also going to cover some information that you don't know, and some of which does not apply to oversight that you all have in Santa Ana. However, I do think it's just as important, it is important to provide the information because the world of civilian oversight of law enforcement is very nuanced and complex. And so we want to make sure that you have kind of a universal picture of the oversight world so that you have an understanding of where Santa Ana fits in the world. So if any of you ever come to a NACOL conference, you will even learn a great deal more. But you have the context to have conversations and be on the same page, so to speak, with someone from a different jurisdiction or city or state who has civilian oversight, but it may look extremely different. So hopefully tonight you'll have a broad understanding of civilian oversight and all of the different variations of it. The agenda, I'll give a brief overview of some broad ideas about civilian oversight, and then pay a little bit of attention to the history or the evolution of oversight, and then talk about the various models and the ranges of authority that typically go along with each of the different models. Lastly, I'll talk about the principles for effective oversight. That last bullet, I know that you all have already as a group reviewed and spent time with the ordinance. And so I'm not going to dedicate a lot of time to that or a separate time. I will point things out as I'm going through the rest of the presentation, things of note that I noticed as I reviewed the ordinance as I was preparing for this presentation tonight. So this is a quote that was captured by an attendant or someone who attended a listening session that the Department of Justice held regarding civilian oversight of law enforcement. And so civilian oversight alone is not sufficient to gain legitimacy. Without it, however, it is difficult, if not impossible, for the police to maintain the public's trust and push sustainable reform efforts forward. So oftentimes, the person who said this is actually a former NACOL board president. But oftentimes we see civilian oversight coming to, or calls for civilian oversight result from a critical incident that's happened in a community or a series of incidents that might have happened, both of which have a negative impact on a community's trust in relation to its local law enforcement. And so in those instances, when something like that does happen, how a community proceeds or deals with that particular incident and the lack of trust that has resulted, it affects the entire community, all segments of the community. And when I speak of all segments of the community or stakeholders of civilian oversight, that encompasses or entails everybody from citizens, law enforcement officers, members of this commission, nonprofit organizations, religious institutions. So when I speak of community, I'm speaking of it broadly, the effect that some kind of incident might have on a community. Now, the most successful efforts or solutions when it comes to incidents where a trust has been broken between community members and law enforcement, it requires a combination of efforts, right? And so often people who may not be as far along with knowing about civilian oversight or have not yet established civilian oversight in their communities have the misperception that if civilian oversight is established in the community, then that will solve all of the issues that exist related to police misconduct or concerns within the criminal legal system or just overall safety of the community. So I do stress that civilian oversight is necessary, we believe, and an essential part of improving police community relations and just overall public safety, but it is not a panacea. It is just one cog in kind of a system that is necessary in order to improve public relationships with law enforcement and community safety overall. Okay, so just so you can have an idea of some of the definitions that exist in some of the more notable resources when it comes to civilian oversight. A mechanism, excuse me, I got too many things up. A mechanism of facilitating civilians' involvement in holding police accountable to the citizens they serve. One or more individuals outside the sworn chain of command of a police department whose work focuses on holding that department and its officers and employees accountable. And then the third definition, the independent, external, and ongoing review of a law enforcement agency, jail, or prison and its operations by individuals outside of the respective agency. And so the common thread, even though there's a little variation among these definitions, the common thread among them all is accountability and also external or civilian involvement of that oversight. Just so you can kind of have an idea of the growth of civilian oversight in the United States. The numbers that you see here are specifically referring to oversight entities that have been codified by legislation, ordinance, or a charter. It does not include any review boards or advisory boards that were established by a local sheriff's office or police department. So these are codified. So in 1980, there were 13 oversight entities that we know of. And then in 2023, there were about 250. And then in 2000, in 2000, there were just over 100. And then in 2023, there are around 250. We are pretty confident that that 250 number is low. That's just the organizations or entities that we, NACOL, are certain that exist and that have been codified. We do learn about different agencies every so often. And so we actually later this summer will be able to have a more accurate count of these entities once we have our database up and running on our website again, where each oversight entity can add its own information. Okay, but just the broad picture. Okay. So why oversight? So you all, by virtue of being here and all the work that has gone on into getting here, are fully aware of some of the benefits or the reasons that cities and communities establish oversight or attempt to. So first and foremost, they protect rights, and those are constitutional rights and civil and human rights. By regularly reviewing or investigating cases, patterns can be identified where there might be violations of rights. And so if patterns are identified of rights violations, then recommendations can be made to address those violations and hopefully prevent them from occurring. Oversight ensures greater accountability. It focuses on officer and departmental compliance with local policies and state and federal laws. It evaluates if internal investigations of complaints have been done fairly, thoroughly, and objectively. And if an oversight entity deems that that is not the case, then there are mechanisms or steps in place to ensure that they can be fair, objective, and thorough. For example, they can sometimes remand cases that have been investigated back to law enforcement for further investigation if they are deemed not objective, fair, or thorough. Oversight also supports effective policing. And so I sit in on a lot of board and commission meetings where they're reviewing cases. And I will say the majority of cases or the reviews that I've observed, the commissions and boards have upheld the internal affairs decisions regarding complaint investigations. And so when investigations are thorough, objective, and fair, we see that pretty frequently that the reviews and the investigations are upheld. Oversight also acknowledges good constitutional policing and, when necessary, makes recommendations for improvements. Civilian oversights build the bridges between law enforcement and the public. Essentially, an oversight entity represents the interests of the public and the community. And so it's the bridge. The entity can convey the community concerns to the law enforcement agency and vice versa, and also can report on police practices and the data to the public. Civilian oversight entities increase public trust and confidence in police. By virtue of working together, oversight entities, along with law enforcement departments, that can establish trust and help the trust to grow between the entities, which is a prerequisite for public trust and confidence in the police. And then ultimately, civilian oversight can help with managing risks. And specifically, where there's a financial component to that is where there are civil lawsuits. So regularly, keeping up with the news and kind of the world of oversight, it is not uncommon to see a city that is liable for monetary damages and payments to someone who has filed a lawsuit against a city or police department because of something that has occurred. And so civilian oversight helps to ensure that people who are involved in misconduct, there is an opportunity for investigation and discipline, and that when practices and policies are violated, citizens' rights are identified and recommendations can be made for corrections. So theoretically, the more oversight becomes proactive, not waiting for an incident to happen before oversight or something occurs, the more risk is minimized. Okay, so moving into the evolution in the history of civilian oversight of law enforcement, it definitely has gained more attention in recent years, and especially since 2020. But civilian oversight has actually been around for quite some time. It has not been an easy road to get established and to be where we are today, but I'll look at a couple of time periods so you can just have an understanding of where we started with civilian oversight and where we are now. So during the 1920s and 1960s, there were essentially three broad trends during this time period. So first, there was social unrest regarding policing and the civil rights movement. And this unrest prompted greater scrutiny of the fairness and integrity of the civilian complaint process when there were concerns or complaints regarding conduct of police. Second, civilian oversight agent entities were established as a reaction to these local crises of confidence. And then third, civilian oversight entities that were created during this time were actually solely responsible for reviewing complaint investigations that were conducted by what we know as internal affairs within police departments. So during this time, only reviews of completed investigations were being done. And just real quickly or briefly, in 1928, the Los Angeles Bar Association established the Committee on Constitutional Rights to record complaints of police misconduct. Now, they recorded complaints, however, they did not have any authority to act in any way regarding the complaints. Then in 1931, the Wickersham Commission was established by President Herbert Hoover with the goal to reform the criminal justice system and issue reforms for recommendations or recommendations for reforming the system. And so you see a quote within the slide. The commission found that physical brutality was a widespread, almost universal police practice. And so they recommended some disinterested agency in every locality take complaints against police. In 1935, New York City established the mayor of task force recommended the creation of a committee of citizens to receive complaints against the police. And this was essentially the result of the 1935 Harlem race riot. And so the mayor at the time appointed a biracial commission to investigate this incident and recommended that a citizen committee be formed. Now, although it was recommended in 1935, it was rejected by city officials. And so you can see on the right side of the slide, 1953, it was almost 20 years later that New York City actually established that review board that was recommended in 1935. In 1948, Washington, D.C. Established a civilian review board. And this is where we see some of the rockiness, where a board or commission can be formed and have some challenges in being able to sustain itself or having the community support to sustain itself. So Washington's trajectory, 1948, the board was established. It was initially comprised of 3 volunteers who reviewed and recommended the disposition of complaints that referred to it by the police chief of Washington, D.C. In the 16 years that it, reviewed 54 cases. In 1965, that 3-member volunteer board expanded to 5 members. In 1980, the board was given independent investigative authority and subpoena power. However, in 1995, the board was abolished due to fight fiscal crises and an unmanageable, untenable backlog of cases. Okay. So same time period, a couple more key commissions that were established. Philadelphia, 1958, established the Police Review Board. Now, this was established by an executive order and ultimately was disbanded in 1967 due to the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas determining that the executive order that established the board was a violation of the city charter. In 1967, here's another commission established by another president. President at the time was Lyndon Johnson. He established the Kerner Commission to investigate the ongoing race riots that were occurring at the time. And so there's a quote that you can read there. Similar to the previous commission, the recommendation was for a specialized agency with adequate funds and staff to be created separate from the other municipal agencies to handle, investigate, and make recommendations on citizen complaints. Okay. And then in 1969, the still running, oldest continuously operating oversight agency was established, Kansas City, Missouri. All right, one slide on this time period. Okay. You've got Berkeley, that was the first, let me just take a step back for a moment. So everything that you saw in the timeline up to this point, those were oversight entities that were tasked with reviewing investigations that were conducted by law enforcement agencies. So in the 70s and 80s, this is where the investigative model, which I'll talk about shortly, emerged. And so it went beyond just reviewing cases. The authorities expanded to actually providing the ability to investigate cases as well, cases of police misconduct. So in 1973 in Berkeley, California, the Police Review Commission was established by an ordinance, and it was the first one in the country specifically authorized to independently investigate police complaints. And then you see in 1981, The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights noted that the level of success among civilian oversight entities varied greatly due to lack of proper authority, resources, and investigative staff. 1982, San Francisco incorporated into their city charter the Office of Citizen Complaints, which took over the civilian complaint investigations from the San Francisco Police Department. 1985, IACOL was formed, and so that was the International Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. I don't know how long it existed. I know for a while, however, it is now dissolved. And then finally, in the 1990s, this is where we saw the rise of authorities given to audit and monitor. Those functions became oversight entities were beginning to be able to exercise those authorities. And I'll go more into that as well in a few minutes. But essentially, Seattle, Washington was the first to establish an independent civilian auditor who audited and reviewed civilian complaint investigations that were completed by the Seattle Police Department. And then in San Jose, those powers were expanded somewhat. And so their auditor was authorized to review completed complaint investigations as well, but also tasked with analyzing complaint trends and statistics and reviewing and recommending improvements to the police department's policies and procedures. And then in 1995, NACOL was formed and has been operating ever since. So in more recent years, what we've seen is more of a proactive effort by communities to have some form of civilian oversight established. So prior years, you saw the commission, the recommendations by the commissions established by presidents and kind of the history of oversight in the 20s and through the 60s. But now we're seeing more communities and jurisdictions recognizing that there doesn't have to be and shouldn't have to be the drive to have civilian oversight as a result of some critical incident. More so, if there's some kind of mechanisms in place that could potentially and prevent something, some sort of critical incident from happening, then that's actually a good way to go. If you think about going back to the previous slide about the why oversight, how it minimizes risks, it builds a bridge between law enforcement and the community, it builds trust. For all of those reasons, communities are recognizing the value of having some kind of oversight mechanism in place. Okay. So I know you all know very well the model that you all, the review model that you all have established in your ordinance, as well as the investigative authority of the director that is written into the legislation. Broadly, I'll go over the different models. And again, although I know that you are familiar with some of these, we do believe it is helpful to be reminded and so that everyone's on the same page. And when you're having conversations about civilian oversight and what you do specifically in Santa Ana, if other jurisdictions that you're talking with do something very different, then you have some understanding of the differences between the general models. So I say general models because many oversight entities generally or broadly follow a review-focused model, an investigation-focused model, or an auditor-monitor focused model. However, that fourth square that you see, the hybrid model, more and more we're seeing communities incorporating elements from the previous three or the general three models and creating a hybrid model. Because of this, there are no two oversight entities in the United States that are exactly the same. So review-focused model, this should sound very familiar to you. primarily have a responsibility to review completed complaint investigations. And this is typically a board or commission or panel. Those are the three common terms that you might hear referring to these types of models, but they're typically comprised of volunteer board and commission members who are appointed by different members of city council or the mayor. There may be designated or seats on the council or commission designated to different organizations within the community. And they often are supported by some department within the city or county government. These committees and commissions do meet according to, in accordance with public laws. And so here are some of the authorities, not an exhaustive list, but the more common ones that we see with review-focused models, receiving complaints directly from the community members and forwarding them to the law enforcement agencies or elsewhere for investigation. They can remand cases back to law enforcement if, upon reviewing a completed investigation by internal affairs, they deem that case not objective, not thorough, or not fair. These entities can hear appeals from complainants or subject officers if neither one is satisfied with the outcome of an investigation. They can recommend case dispositions, discipline, or revisions to law enforcement policy and procedures. They can hold public forums and conduct community outreach. Now, in reviewing your ordinance, I think all of these or most, if not all, are actually specifically indicated in your ordinance. And then the investigation focus model, I am aware that you all have a independent oversight director who by legislating authority can conduct investigations. And so investigation focus models sounds exactly like what it is. The oversight agency can conduct investigations. And this can look different depending on what oversight entity authorizes or the city permits. So in some cases, the investigator may conduct investigations at the same time that the law enforcement agency. In some cases, they can only conduct investigations after the law enforcement agency investigation has been completed. And then in some cases, very few cases, the oversight entity actually replaces the internal affairs unit of law enforcement. And typically, the individual who is in an investigative role has specialized training and a background often in conducting investigations. However, investigations units often work hand in hand or alongside the volunteer boards and commissions. And so here are some, not all, of the authorities that investigation focused models come with. Anything that is involved in an investigation, conducting interviews, gathering evidence, all of those sorts of things. Oftentimes, and I noticed this in your ordinance to be the case, investigations can be conducted regarding certain allegations. And I know your ordinance listed out 10 different areas that the commission can actually review cases, closed investigations, but also the same 10 areas that can be investigated by the director. Sometimes the investigations may be limited, or the investigator may be limited to investigating allegations based on who filed the complaint. And so, for example, was it a citizen in the community or was it someone who filed the complaint within the law enforcement agency? Also, was the complaint filed with the commission or the board, or was it filed directly with the police department? So that can look different with different oversight agencies, with investigation authorities. Now, just because of the nature of investigations, of course, and those with investigator models will have greater access to law enforcement records and information compared to jurisdictions with just review authorities. And also, these investigation models are more likely to have subpoena power. And so I know that there is subpoena power written into the legislation that you all have. Okay. And then finally, of the three broad models is the auditor monitor focus model. Now, if you've heard of the terms of positions, an inspector general or a police monitor, this is the sort of oversight that is involved with those positions. And essentially, this takes a much broader scope or approach to civilian oversight and focuses more on systemic issues and analyzing patterns and trends, and involves paid staff who oftentimes have experience, training, a background in with conducting these types of audits and monitoring functions. Now, looking at their ranges of authority, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, but on the left side of the screen, you'll see the first two columns. They focus on the broad scope that these auditor monitor focused oversight entities have. And so they audit, they monitor, investigate, and review a wide range of law enforcement policies, practices, and procedures. And so below that, you'll see some of the examples of what those might be. They can monitor and audit the complaints, the number of complaints, the types of complaints that have been filed. They can look at the disciplinary or discipline that has been meted out as a result of the complaints. They can look at the training program that within the police department and what's required and who provides the training, those sorts of things, staffing and recruitment. So as you can see, it's a broad scope that auditors and monitors have. And because of the broad scope and the nature of what it is that they do, then like investigators, they will have a broader range of or more access to law enforcement records and information, and more direct access as well. Now, on the right side of the screen, the three columns that you see that are shaded green, those are some of the specific duties related to civilian complaints of law enforcement. And so when it comes to complaints, the auditors and monitors can review the process to ensure that it's fair, thorough, and it's in compliance with policies and procedures. They can audit civilian and internal complaints, and they can actively participate in open investigations as well. So again, all three of these broad models, these are general authorities that they have, but it will look different from entity to entity. And then finally, the hybrid models. We call these hybrid models, well, there are two general kind of hybrid models, but essentially hybrid models take different elements from the review focus model, auditor monitor model, and the investigator model, and create their own thing. And so when we speak of a hybrid agency, that can be one oversight agency within a jurisdiction that performs the different oversight functions from the three different models. Or there can be a hybrid system where there are different entities that provide oversight of the same law enforcement department. And so this looks different by jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And again, we see this happening more and more because each community creates what is most effective and makes the most sense for their community. All right. So finally, I'm going to address the principles for effective oversight. And there are 13 of them, and I'm going to go through each of them, but not spend an inordinate amount of time on each one. Okay, so first and foremost, just a note on the term we use, principles for effective oversight. We don't often use best practices for effective oversight purposefully, because we understand that what might be best for one community, depending on a number of factors specific to that community, may not be the best for other communities. And so we like to refer to these principles for effective oversight rather than best practices. Okay, so number one, independence. So when it comes to independence, oversight entities should be structurally, politically, and operationally independent. And I'm going to speak in the ideal world, with an understanding that that is not always the case. But structural independence, the oversight entity is distinctly separate administratively from the overseeing law enforcement agency. And so that is the case when it comes to Santa Ana. And then political independence. This refers to political actors not having influence or being able to affect the operations of the oversight entity. And this can be affected by, or the level of political independence may be affected by whether the civilian oversight entity is established by mayoral executive order versus an ordinance, whether it shares a municipality's legal counsel with other departments and law enforcement, or it has its own, or whether the political actors in the community have authority over hirings, appointments, and removing staff or commission members. Okay. Operational or procedural independence refers to when oversight is structurally independent. Even when, if structural and political independence is in place, if there is no operational independence, then that can impede the work that needs to be done. So, for example, if the oversight entity requires approval from a law enforcement agency or someone else in order to initiate an investigation or issue a subpoena. So that can definitely impede getting the work done. Okay. Number two, clearly defined and adequate jurisdiction and authority. So essentially, what specifically is the oversight entity authorized to do? What types of cases can it review or investigate? And those things are clearly spelled out in your ordinance. But in general, as clearly as these things can be written in the ordinance, the better. So that leaves little room for interpretation. However, that also has to be balanced out with not being so restrictive and defined that the oversight entity is boxed in some way. But having these clearly defined authorities and jurisdiction can prevent and minimize any confusion that might occur if they didn't exist. Number three, unfettered access to records and facilities. And this is going to depend on what is authorized by the legislating authority for your oversight entity. But essentially, whatever, or the rule of thumb, whatever is required in order to carry out the mandates of the oversight entity, then the records, the facilities, meaning if sheriff's oversight is involved, or oversight of jails and prisons, which I know is not a part of Santa Ana, but it is for some other jurisdictions. But having access to the records is really important, or facilities, in order to carry out the mandates or fulfill the mandates. Okay. And of course, access to law enforcement executives and internal affairs staff. Having the good lines of communications and effective communications with law enforcement will help to get the work done. And it's important in order to get the work done, especially if you've got an investigator or an auditor or monitor in place. Okay, so full cooperation. So again, it goes a long way and is necessary to have the cooperation of law enforcement in order to perform that effective oversight. ideally, there might be something in the legislation or policies and procedures where there is a consequence if there is a lack of cooperation that is impeding the oversight entity from getting its work done and fulfilling its mandate. Sustained stakeholder support. Okay. It's easy in the beginning or when there's a huge cry or call for oversight of law enforcement from the community. People are gung-ho, people are, demanding or wanting this. But over time, if that support wanes, then that can negatively affect the existence or the work that is being able to be done by the oversight entity. And so again, when I refer to stakeholders, that's all segments of a community: law enforcement, the community, city government, religious institutions, anybody who has a stake in keeping communities safe and ensuring accountability and transparency with policing and just with the community overall. And so having a plan in place to ensure that there's continued support and that there's active efforts to engage the community and maintain that support is important. Okay. Adequate funding and operational resources. This is going to vary what this looks like, how much funding an agency receives or an oversight entity. Of course, larger cities with that have had established oversight agencies for a long time often have, sufficient funding to carry out their duties. Smaller jurisdictions often do not have those resources or funding, and so are faced with challenges that come along with that. But funding and operational resources are important. And so resources, just thinking about what's required, even if it's just the volunteer board as opposed to having paid staff, it still requires new member training, ongoing training, specialized training. When it comes to community outreach, there may be some costs associated with that. When it comes to issuing reports that are generated, there's some costs associated with that. And so having some kind of support and funding is very helpful and necessary. And then public reporting and transparency. Oversight entities exist in many cases because of calls for it from the community. And so it is imperative that the work of oversight entities is known and efforts are made to inform the public and other stakeholders about the work that's being done. When it comes to generating reports, it is important that the reports not be censored or modified by political stakeholders or law enforcement agencies. The report should be written in a manner that's accessible as possible to the public. So that means, we know if the general literacy level of the general public is about 7th or 8th grade reading level, then creating reports that with that in mind, and also, if possible, making reports available in multiple languages, and including in the report as much information as possible without violating any confidentiality or union rules. Okay. Now, in looking at your ordinance, it very clearly listed out what is required to be reported. And so it was a very clear list. And also I recognize like an annual report was included in the legislation as well. We also, that is what we recommend at minimum, an annual report. And then also once the commission starts reviewing cases and there may be an opportunity or a reason to issue a special report and make it available to the community and stakeholders. And these special reports might look like, a look at some specific issues such as traffic stops or use of force, or if there's an investigation that was conducted that might be helpful to report on. So special reports are encouraged as needed as well. Okay. Getting near the end, policy and pattern analysis. And so ideally, if there's an opportunity to have an overall or broader look at systemic issues rather than just individual review or investigation of cases, then that goes a long way. It's being more proactive rather than reactive, which nothing wrong, because absolutely, you all are tasked and it's important work to review cases and investigate cases. Ideally, hand in hand with that would be kind of the broader picture over time of what that looks like. And if you recognize that there are patterns in cases that are being filed, in cases that are being founded, in policies that may, actions may be according to policy. However, over time, if an issue related to that policy shows up over and over, then that's an indication that, hey, maybe there's something going on. We need to take a look at this policy and if there's a way to improve it. But this requires, tracking information, providing, keeping data, statistics on the cases and the work that you're doing. Okay, community outreach and community involvement go hand in hand. But it is important that oversight entities make an effort to involve the community and as much as possible, and take proactive steps to educate the community on what the civilian oversight entity role in the community is, as well as the work that you're doing. Sharing reports, facilitating public forums, and I know both of those things are in your ordinance. If there's an opportunity to recruit volunteers for something or solicit community input, then that goes a long way with building the relationships between the community, the oversight entity, as well as the law enforcement agency. Okay. And then confidentiality, anonymity, and protection from retaliation. This is important. And I know that in your ordinance, it indicates that citizens can file complaints, or people can file complaints anonymously or confidentially anonymously. So that is a good thing to have in place and spelled out in the ordinance. But I'll point out here, just as we and communities expect certain things from law enforcement agencies, the same expectation should be in place for oversight entities. And so just as we expect different agencies to respect confidentiality and protect people from retaliation when they file a complaint about something, we should ensure that we're doing that as well. When I say we, oversight entities, okay? We absolutely have to respect any laws, rules, policies related to confidentiality, and have to be very careful about when we do issue reports, what is in those reports, and ensuring that nothing violates confidentiality. Okay. And also is helpful to have in place some kind of policy that addresses what happens if any of these things are violated or broken. And so hopefully nothing like that ever happens, but it is possible, and it has happened before in other jurisdictions. So if there's something in place that can guide everyone through the process, then that is helpful. Okay, lastly, there are 2 slides on this principle: procedural justice and legitimacy. So procedural justice essentially focuses on how something is done rather than just the outcome. And so you all will probably see, if you haven't already, but in the work that I've been doing with communities and attending some community meetings in person and just doing the training and listening to how oversight is going in different jurisdictions, I've heard several times from commissions and boards how someone who filed a complaint What they really wanted was to be heard, and they felt like they weren't being heard, they weren't being respected. And so had those things occurred, a complaint may not have been filed. And so this is related to procedural justice because that focuses on how something happens, the process in which something happens. And so when it comes to, say, a citizen law enforcement interaction, the nature of that interaction can determine the outcome of whether or not someone files a complaint. So the four components or elements of procedural justice, right here you see voice, neutrality, trust, and dignity and respect. And so voice simply refers to everyone is given a chance to tell their side of the story. And that is essentially what oversight offers, right? Community voice. Neutrality, that refers to decisions being made in an unbiased way, and the reasoning of or how a decision is arrived at, there's transparency in that. So again, that is what civilian oversight offers. Trust, of course, if decision makers are acting with integrity and demonstrating trustworthiness to people and individuals who are impacted by the decisions that are being made, that is an essential component. And then everyone is being treated with dignity and respect. If those four elements are in place, then that can prevent some of the things or the outcomes that we see with how with complaints being filed in the first place. So I'll go back to, just as we expect or ask for law enforcement to allow, dignity and respect and neutrality and objectivity in the work, community members are going to expect the same of any oversight entity. And this is the final slide. So overall, legitimacy is an important concept when it comes to civilian oversight, right? If a community sees civilian oversight, the civilian oversight mechanism in the community as legitimate, then they're more likely to provide that long-term support of the entity. If they lose trust or faith in the oversight entity, then there's going to be a lack of legitimacy in their eyes, okay? And so when in this case, when we're talking about legitimacy and policing and legitimacy and oversight, we're not talking about what is like statutory authority, what you are allowed to do or authorized to do by ordinance or state law, but we're talking about having legitimacy-based authority, right? So the community believes that what you're doing is good, that you have good intentions, that you're trustworthy, that you care about the community concerns. And so on the left side, you will see what legitimacy in policing looks like, right? If police are viewed as legitimate, there's trust, there's a perception that they're honest, trustworthy, they are concerned about individuals they deal with, their authority should be accepted. Individuals should follow their directives and accept the decisions that are made, and that people should comply with laws and cooperate with police. That's if legitimacy is in place. So same on the flip side, legitimacy and oversight. What does that look like? If there's legitimacy, the perception, the public views the oversight mechanism as legitimate, then they view the oversight entities as trustworthy, honest, and concerned with the well-being of individuals. They accept decisions that are made by the oversight entities and believe that the oversight authority should be accepted. And then they should comply with the laws and cooperate with the oversight agency. So this is a very important concept, and I would encourage, with all the work that you do, that you continue to keep this particularly at the forefront, so that the community can continue to have, view the oversight entities in place as legitimate authorities. And so finally, there is my email address if you have questions or comments or want to follow up with me about anything. But before I stop sharing, I will ask if there's a need to go back to any particular slide or if there are any questions about anything that I covered tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Barr, for that presentation. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the commission for any questions.
Okay.
Start to my left. Go ahead, Commissioner Mejia.
Hi, thank you so much for a great presentation. I have a question of whether there's a repository of resources, and I know that you don't have any of the evidence-based practices, but just on the principles of community outreach and involvement of examples of, because we are new, of how we can start engaging with the community and what has worked for others. That would be really great if you can share that.
Okay, so we don't yet have a repository. However, that is in the works for this year. So earlier I mentioned having a database that we're working on, and we should be better able to capture a more accurate count of how many oversight entities exist. I'm going to stop sharing this so I can actually kind of see you all. So bear with me a moment when I do that. And so a part of that database that I referred to, we will actually have a system where every agency can upload all their documents, their policies, their ordinance, any forms that they use in investigations, anything and everybody, so that it can be freely available to any oversight entity across the world. And I do say world because we work with other countries on this issue who are often asking for our assistance and documentation and everything. So having said that, some of the community outreach that I'm aware of that different oversight entities have done, when it comes to boards and commissions, they've attended different types of community events, whether it's like a health fair or some kind of summer fair out in the park or something. And so people have teamed up. Doesn't require all commission members to be involved with that, but they might pair up, 2 or 3 of them go out and just have a table set up where they can interact with the public, educate the public, increase awareness about what the board or commission does. I have seen efforts to be more proactive about inviting the public to attend board meetings. There are a lot of newer agencies that initially there's a higher number of public participation in boards because it's a new board and people are interested, and then eventually the interest wears off. But there are some efforts that some boards have taken to be proactive in doing that. Let's see, there are mentioned in your ordinance, boards have held public forums or listening sessions where it might be a couple times a year, or it might be, you all are fairly new, but down the road, if you get to a point where you realize, for example, that there's something in your ordinance that maybe not be working the best for you, and there might be an amendment to it. Boards and commissions have held listening sessions. Well, to get more feedback and input on what might be a better way to do something in consideration of proposing an amendment to the ordinance. Those are just some examples that come to mind. I will say, wait a minute, I thought of another one. When it comes to, you all also will have a director in place. And so I have seen a jurisdiction hold a meet and greet with their director or their investigator. And so they've opened it up to the general public. They've announced it in different ways, and they've had, I think the one that I'm familiar with, they had about 50 community members show up to meet the new director. And so there was no official agenda. There was no, business that was occurring. It was simply come out, meet your independent director. And so it was very informal. I do want to point out, though, keep in mind the efforts that you do have for any type of public or community outreach. I know you have to keep in mind what constitutes an official meeting. And so that's why some of the, when other boards and commissions have done events in the community, they haven't had enough people for a quorum. So it wouldn't be officially considered a meeting of the body. So I'm sure I could come up with more, but that's what I can think of off the top of my head right now.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other commissioners have questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Perea.
Thank you, Ms. Barr, for the presentation. I really appreciate also the historical context as to why we are here in terms of oversight calls from residents of their cities. I have a question regarding the investigation focus model. I think ours is a little bit of a hybrid.
Yeah.
In the initial community demands of the city council, when community members were advocating for a police oversight entity, part of the calls were to have an oversight commission that had teeth, that had power. And one of those, some of the components of those that did not make it into the ordinance were direct disciplinary power of police and the ability to hire and fire the chief of police. Now, the conversation that took place at that time with the council was that those specific components were not possible in the ordinance because they require an amendment of the charter, meaning that it requires the will of the people to vote on it through a measure. But I'm wondering if there is an example of a commission across the nation that has some of those components that we did not get to include in this current form of the commission.
Oh, it was the ability to hire and fire and the ability to
chief of,
discipline.
the chief of police and the ability to have direct disciplinary power.
Okay. And this is where my newness, unfortunately, is going to I'm not going to be able to answer everything. However, there are a handful of oversight entities that have the ability to hire and fire chiefs of police. I want to say, and I would have to double check this, but I know I've been in I'm in communication with a lot of different jurisdictions requesting training for various things, but I think Cleveland may be one of the jurisdictions that has the ability to hire and fire chiefs of police. There are not many that have this authority, though. When it comes to disciplining police, there are not many of those as well. What I could do, I am happy to take the time after this to find out the specific entities that have these abilities, and then I can forward that to you all. So I don't want to misspeak, but I want you all to have that information.
Thank you, Ms. White. That information will be really appreciated. And I have a couple of questions, so bear with me for a bit. The second question is regarding the independence of the board. Now, our commission is appointed by the mayor and individual council member through nominations. So in many ways, we are at the will of the council. But I'm wondering in terms of other commissions or oversight entities that might not be that are not appointed by council, how are those appointments or the selection of those oversight commission members done?
If they're not appointed by, I can't think of commissions or boards where there's not some involvement of either city council or mayor's office or the mayor. When it comes to commissions and boards, even the seats that are designated for, say, different, it might be different types of organizations, like grassroots organizations in the community. They still have to have some kind of nomination process or, yeah, a list of people who are proposed that has to be approved by the city council.
And within those, is there um, an instance where members are appointed but then can be removed by council? So I'm wondering, because for it to have true independence, it will require, right, that the oversight commission is not at the will of a political majority of the council.
Right.
And so I'm kind of wondering, kind of like, what are the other models out there to have in a many way a commission that is not constrained to those political changes?
Right. And so when it comes to that independence, so here's the paradox, right? We say independent from the agency that's being overseen. But because by virtue of oversight, codified oversight bodies going through the local legislative process to even exist, there is a connection to the city government or county government. So if you're thinking of something that is completely separate from any form of city government, then there is not anything like that. There are sometimes some communities have advisory boards or advisory groups that advise police departments or law enforcement agencies, but unless they're codified by ordinance, then they actually, they can exist one day and then the very next day be gone. And so when we say independence, it's more so independence from the oversight or the agency being overseen rather than independence from the city in all ways.
Thank you. My last question is, in the many jurisdictions that Nicole has provided support or watches, if you can give us an example when an oversight entity has lost its legitimacy. I know we have some examples here in terms of what that will constitute legitimacy, but I'm also wondering, given the different things that happen across the nation, what has caused for an entity to lose legitimacy within the community?
Okay, so I won't name any specifically, but I will say that there has been a loss in legitimacy when oversight, say a board has existed, but for a couple years, but not reviewed a case. Now, a part of this in any board is there's a lot of training that's required before you can start reviewing cases. So that's understood and that's acceptable. But if an entity has existed for a number of years and has not reviewed cases, there's a loss of legitimacy. If they've reviewed cases but not published a report explaining what they've done, how many cases were reviewed, what were the outcomes, then there's the lack of transparency, which leads to a loss in legitimacy. So I would say that generally, when the community does not see what the work, what the board is doing and what the board is accomplishing. Now, even at this point, with you all being fairly new, it would be helpful. I don't know if you're doing this or not, but I don't know if the community is aware of, like right now, you're in a phase where you're going through a lot of training because it requires a lot to get to the point where you can actually start reviewing cases. But consistently keeping the community informed can prevent the loss of legitimacy. Even if, say, there's a huge outcry for something that has happened in the community, say, there's a significant, a critical incident involving law enforcement, and the community is demanding something happen right now, because they're going to demand it from law enforcement and from you all as well. It takes time to investigate. It takes time to review completed investigations. And so you might not be able to provide the information they want right away. However, if you keep the line of communication open, then that can help prevent the loss of legitimacy. If you didn't communicate, say, for example, if there were a critical incident and they weren't hearing anything from you, then they would start to question, well, what are you doing? I thought we put you, we got this oversight in place so you all can take care of this stuff. These are some of the things that you are going to hear. And so in order to prevent that from happening, or hopefully prevent that from happening, what we, talked about earlier, you can call a forum, and even better if you call a forum together alongside your police, representative from your police department, and inform the people of what it is that you're doing. We don't have the information right now. We have not completed the investigation, but here we are in the process. So I think for the most part, where I see loss of legitimacy is when, and I'll touch another thing. Let me write this down so I don't forget. When the community is not aware of the work that you're doing. I also see loss of legitimacy when the work is not getting done, period, for whatever reason. Whether it's a budgeting issue, whether it's, waiting for positions to be filled. If the work is not getting done in some way, then that can lead to the loss of legitimacy. And there can when there are issues that arise, and most oversight entities will experience this, that kind of pauses or slows down the work that is being done, there can still be tasks or things that are done. The work doesn't have to come full stop. When things come full stop, that's when there can be a loss in legitimacy. Also, hopefully you all have not experienced this and will not experience this when there's internal strife on a board or commission, and that becomes publicly noticed, then that definitely can lead to a loss of legitimacy. Not just with oversight entities, but with various, county commission meetings or city council meetings. Sometimes all of these things are recorded and available to watch via the internet now. And so a lot of things can go viral. And so if there's infighting, if there's internal strife, and it's not contained and dealt with effectively, then if it bubbles over into public forums, then that will absolutely contribute to loss of legitimacy.
Thank you, Ms. I really appreciate your answers, but also the recommendations based on what you have seen for us to consider. That's all from me.
You're welcome.
Commissioners to my right, any questions? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Hi, Ms. Barr, thank you so much for your presentation. I have a few questions. So my colleague, Commissioner Pereira, talked about loss of legitimacy, and one thing I'm curious about is whether you know anything about terms that, or I guess the terms that commissioners on other police oversight commissions serve. And the reason I bring that up is you mentioned that a lack of activity could lead to a loss of legitimacy. And just in our experience, we've been meeting for 6 months and we haven't reviewed a case yet. My term ends in December. At that point, I would have to be replaced if I'm not reappointed by my council member, and that person will have to go through the same training. And I think it's the same for many commissioners who sit on the council. I'm sorry, on the commission. And I guess I'm wondering is how common are one-year terms on other police oversight commissions, or how long are those terms, if you know?
They're generally, from what I've seen since I've been working with Nicole, they're longer than a year. However, more like 2 years. However, with a new board, I know that most boards and commissions have staggered terms. And so it's understandable in the beginning that there might be some 1-year terms just so that the staggered appointments occur. So if everyone, a new entity started and everyone had 2-year terms, then of course that would not leave the members who have been serving for a while on the board if there's turnover of everyone. So, but it's usually more than a year, more like 2 to 3 years after the initial phase. And I do want to say that as far as the lack of activity in the beginning, it's understandable at this point. There is a lot of information, and I don't know, I can't remember specifically. I think like ride-alongs were suggested, but I know that you all have had, I think in the legislation, the ordinance, there's all kinds of training related to police policies and procedures. And so I know that I think we will be doing training on reviewing cases and conducting investigations. And so in the beginning, the first year, it is understandable and it is very common for there not to be a review of a case for a while. And so I don't want you to lead you to believe that, you should be reviewing cases right now, because you got to have that good grounding, a good foundation in place before that occurs.
Thank you. That's helpful. A follow-up question to that is, do you have any insight as to how long it typically takes a council from the time that they're created to start actually reviewing cases in your experience?
That's going to be my short experience. So that's where my newness to NACOL is going to show too. But with the few agencies or entities that I have been working with that are newer, it's taken over a year for them to actually review their first case. It's a lot of training. A lot of boards and commissions are required to do ride-along, some even more than one shift. And so, yeah, it's not unusual for it to take a year.
Thank you. Another question is whether you know how common resistance to police oversight boards is in communities that have enacted them, like after the fact. I know, for instance, Florida has taken steps to limit the power of police oversight commissions. And I'm curious whether you have any information about whether that's happened in other places that maybe hasn't gotten coverage, or whether that's a trend that you see could potentially, continue.
This is a popular request when we have our annual conference, and we get feedback from what sessions would you like to see at the conference or the webinars that we do. And this one comes up pretty often. I think there are probably more communities that are dealing with this than not. And so, not to say that oversight entities cannot have good relationships with law enforcement in their community and get good work done, and because there are communities like that, but there's a lot of resistance to civilian oversight. Unfortunately, I think there is a misconception, and this is among many members. Remember, in the community, when I talk about stakeholders, whether it's citizens, activists, law enforcement, I think there is a misconception that civilian oversight of law enforcement is an us against them issue or us against them thing. And in reality, it really is an effort to improve overall safety and ensure accountability and transparency when it comes to policing in the community. And so some law enforcement agencies are on board and are okay with that, and others are not. And so,
What are
but
the what are
Mhm.
the reasons that are advocated against police oversight boards by people who are against them?
One of the common things I hear is that there are already systems in place to ensure that investigations are conducted fairly. I also hear, wait a minute, that I also hear that, well, and this is not my language, this is just kind of what I've heard a few times that, well, why are we going to have people reviewing cases that they don't even know what the policies and procedures and what law enforcement goes through. And just in general, going back to the misconceptions, I think there are some people who may be opposed, well, actually on either side, who don't really have a good understanding of what oversight is. And so they look at it as an anti-police effort.
I
So
see.
those are some of the more common ones that immediately come to mind.
Okay, and on that point, one thing that I'm also wondering about is if there's resistance to police oversight boards from police departments in some places, it makes me wonder about like the effectiveness of police oversight boards. And for instance, like our board, we can make recommendations. And I guess what I'm curious about is how often is it the case, from what you've seen or maybe what your colleagues have seen, that a police oversight board will make a recommendation or make recommendations that are just ignored by the police departments that they're intended to help oversee?
I can't quantify that because that's nothing that we track, but I'll first point out that going back to the reviews that I've observed and sat in on of various committees all over the country, for the most part, they uphold what the internal investigations have found. I know that there are some that I've reviewed. I mean, sometimes I'll just go onto different oversight boards websites and check out their minutes and their reviews of cases. And so there are some that in fact don't agree with the internal affairs outcome, and the recommendations are made to that there's a disagreement, or recommendations are made on what to improve regarding that investigation or the policy. I do know, and I'll preface this. I, in my position, sometimes hear all of the difficult and the challenging things. And so I don't want that to kind of color or lead you to think that everything is a challenge in oversight. What we advise with committees and boards, if they make recommendations and they're totally ignored, or because you don't have the authority to enforce those recommendations, then this is where the transparency and keeping the community aware of what you're doing becomes very important. So in that annual report that you all are required to publish, there should be a summation, or it would be helpful if there were a summary of what your recommendations were, as well as what the follow-up from the police department has been. And so that way, the community is aware not only of what you all did as a commission did or are doing, and what you've recommended to the police department, but also the response from the police department. So that way, communities informed, they know that are making efforts, and you all are representative of the community, but you have the community behind you as well. And so if they see that you are doing what you are have been entrusted to do as commissioners, but there's a barrier with the work that you're doing and the recommendations being accepted, then that's something that the community support can come in handy. It can be beneficial. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Barr.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Keeping with the theme of legitimacy, we're all up here pretty much at the whim of our council person or mayor. And to me, that kind of detracts from the legitimacy of everyone here because it does
Okay.
sort of a political committee.
Mhm.
And to the other point on that is if we're not going to review a case for a year, which is legitimate, I can understand that given the amount of training that's required, some of us are going to be termed out by that time because a new council person will come in and they have every right to replace you with their person, which to the other member's point is we kind of start the whole process over again and things just get delayed. The can keeps getting kicked down the road and nothing happens. To me, this is all kind of, if I'm in the public, I'm thinking, this isn't legitimate at all.
Right.
What are your answers or cures or solutions to that? And I think, in my opinion, there should be some kind of set, and I know that's not in our ordinance, there should be something within the ordinance that says you shall serve for X amount of time. Because I can see this falling apart for the simple reasons that you've defined.
I'm sorry, can you clarify one thing for me? Did
Yes,
you
ma'am.
say it is not in the ordinance, the term?
I don't believe it is, if my memory's correct. If somebody
Hold
can
on.
do that, I'd appreciate it. Because
I can speak to that
Can you
briefly,
speak to that?
Vice
Yeah.
Chair. My understanding and my review of the ordinance is that there is no term associated specifically with the commissioners, so the term would be linked to the council member or the mayor if the mayor appointed you. So it would be
Exactly.
linked intrinsically to their term.
That's my point, right? I mean, we could all be swept out. With every change of the council, we can all be swept away, which again, to me, that just negates any kind of legitimacy because you're starting over again.
Okay, I'm sorry. I totally, somehow that escaped me when I reviewed your ordinance, but I will say that for me, again, I'm newer staff at Nicole. This is the first ordinance that I've seen where the term hasn't been specified. Not saying it's the only one out there like this, but it's and I should never assume, but when I reviewed this, I think I didn't pay much attention because I always assume that there's a specific appointment period.
No, like I say, we're at the whim of our council person or mayor. And to your point on that, if it takes a year, in essence, to get up to speed, then the term should be at least 2 or 3 years.
Right, and let me just say, even though I say like it's not unusual for a year to go by before a new commission that's newly established reviews a case, that doesn't have to be the case. So it depends on how soon can you get all of the training that is required done. A part of what takes so long with a lot of boards and commissions is finding the time where all commission members can actually participate in training or
No,
fulfill the
I fully appreciate that. And we've been struggling with that. And quite frankly, there's been a great effort to get that done. But again, my point being, it's going to take, it's already been 6 months. Let's be conservative and say we got it all done in 9 months. And again, my co-chair or committee member here is termed out and the person comes in and sweeps him away.
Right.
Now he's got to start, the new person's got to start at the beginning, which again, like I said, it just keeps kicking the can down the road. And again, in my mind, that really degrades the legitimacy of the committee.
Right. I understand what you're saying now. Yes. Yeah, I mean,
Do you have input or answers for that? Do you have solutions for that?
well, it's by ordinance, right? It's not included in the ordinance, and so it would require an amendment, I would think.
Okay, that's good. That's what I need to hear.
Yeah.
The other question for you is, the cities that have enacted these committees, is there any statistical evidence or proof or whatever you want to call it that says, yes, the oversight committee was effective and did create policy change?
Um,
Or
there,
reduction in police complaints or what have you?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
I say our reduction in police complaints, have the committees had an effective, have they been effective in the community and with the police force in reducing complaints? In the city
There-
have committees?
Right. This is the question that is asked most often, and this is sadly, there's not research or statistical data available about that. There is no comprehensive way of collecting that. And so sadly, the answer is no, we can't provide that information because we don't know where it is, if it exists.
Can you give me an experiential answer? From your experience, what can you give me an answer?
I can't tell you either way whether, just because I can say there are effective practices that individual oversight and oversight boards or commissions have done. They've had success with changing policy or for the better, but I cannot tell you like percentage wise or how frequently or anything like that.
No, I understand that. One of the cities you listed, I believe, was Kansas City, correct?
Yeah, the longest, yeah.
You know, had some historically severe issues.
Mhm.
Are things better there? Can we say that or no?
I don't know. I don't know. I will say this. If our executive director were doing this training, she's been in oversight for over 20 years. She's worked with NACOL for over 20 years and has worked with jurisdictions all over the country. I have worked with NACOL since August, and so I have had much more limited contact with oversight entities. And so because there's no existing database or there's no comprehensive way of capturing the effectiveness of it, really people who are involved in oversight, they've learned about it because historically they've been involved for so long. And so they can better answer these types of questions. I'm sorry, I just don't know.
No, I can appreciate that. Again, if we're talking about legitimacy, which you drilled home is a very important part. If you can't validate the legitimacy of police oversight committees, then that brings into question the whole legitimacy of the committee in itself. If you can't tell me, and I'm not saying you, but Nicole can't say, hey, look, this turned this city around, right? We had severe issues and it's a better place. If we can't get that, to me, the legitimacy is questionable from the get-go. So to me, those are important things that we need to know as a committee. And I think in particular, the police need to know.
Well, I think with Santa Ana, you all have the opportunity to start tracking what you're doing, collecting data, reviewing cases, which recommendations are accepted by the law enforcement agency. So you all will be actually tracking and collecting and synthesizing that data and providing it to the community. So even though we don't have a comprehensive understanding of what this looks like across the board, each individual entity has the ability to track that for themselves and to determine. Of course, it's going to take time because it's going to be, a couple years worth of data where you start understanding, is what we're doing working? Is it effective?
And that's kind of to my point. Other cities that have these commissions, it would be nice to know the mistakes they made to make things better, right? Because I think there are, at least my intent personally, is to make things better for everybody.
Yeah.
So you understand what I'm saying? I mean, it would be nice to have some real input that says, hey, these things work, these things don't work. I appreciate what you're telling us about having to track that over time. I get it, that makes sense. But some kind of background input would, I think, be helpful.
Mhm.
If that makes sense.
When you say when things work or don't work, can you just give me,
Well,
um,
let's say you have, because some of these committees dissolved. The examples you gave us, they dissolved. Well, obviously things weren't working, right? Because I cannot believe there's a community out there that is absolutely perfect and there's no complaints with
right?
police or citizenry. So something went wrong.
Well, I think what I having a hard time seeing everybody, but what the question was earlier about the loss of legitimacy and what went wrong, um there I think I gave a couple of examples of like where the loss of legitimacy most often in my experience since I've been with Nicole, where I've seen it. And so the main thing that I believe would have helped prevent, in some cases, the loss of legitimacy was being transparent with the public, the oversight entity itself. When it came to the internal conflict within the members of the commission, um, dealing with that head on and coming to the table, understanding like we're here for a specific purpose. You cannot let egos, you can't let personal issues get in the way. When those things occur, that's really that's a major issue when it comes to eventually dissolving or losing credibility and legitimacy. Um, yeah, I know I'm not satisfactorily
No,
answering.
I appreciate that. That's very good input, and was kind of the things I was looking to hear. Because again, I think everyone here has the sincere intent of making this work.
Yeah, I would
I
say
have the best foot forward from the get-go, if that makes sense to you.
you do not underestimate the effectiveness of keeping your community informed about what you're doing. You haven't reviewed any cases right now?
No, ma'am.
Well, no, I was gonna say, if you haven't, then if they understand that it's because you're going through the training process and it requires a lot. Um, people are pretty, just generally speaking, um, people are pretty supportive of oversight and the work that you're doing and think it's necessary. And so if you're open, and transparent with them, then they're generally very supportive. It's when they don't understand what you're doing. They don't, there's no effort to communicate what's going on. That's where the questions start to arise and the disgruntledness comes into play. But that also speaks to the importance of that community engagement and involvement and outreach, right? If you have, if people recognize um, that your commission members are at community events or that they get to know you through a public forum or some way or another, then they are more allies and supporters as opposed to detractors and naysayers about what you're doing. So remember, that procedural justice, I guess in a way, kind of applies to what we're talking about too. So with the procedural justice, with that concept, what is more important or equally as important as the outcome of an investigation or incident is how it's handled, what the process is. And so if your community, if the outcome is, okay, just making this up, we've been going through training for 9 months and we have not yet reviewed one case. Okay. If the community understands what it is you've been doing in the 9 months, you're not just all sitting at home, not getting prepped and up to speed in order to start reviewing cases. If they're aware of that part, then it's more acceptable and understood why a case hasn't been reviewed. If they didn't know that part, they had to wonder what's going on. That's where the loss of legitimacy comes into play. So I think I can't stress enough the transparency, keeping the community informed about what you're doing, and having that community outreach, so that there is communication both ways between you and community members.
Makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Commissioner
I have a
Goransky.
question. I want to back this up to Vice Chair's concern, and back at the beginning where he started out. Why do we meet so late? I don't mean time-wise, I mean only once a month. If we want to be trained and educated with police procedures, the longer you have meetings or get-togethers, the more you're going to forget. Say if we meet twice a month, the information that we learned at the first meeting is fresher in our minds, and to continue on with the next. Otherwise, a month here and a month there, a month here, they're just so far apart. Why do we not meet twice a month? Is there a reason for that? Is this not available, or what's the reason? What is the reasoning for that? And to whom do I address? I really don't know.
I think that's a question
Yeah.
for staff.
Commissioner, I would just opine that Ms. Barr probably is not most qualified to answer that question.
Yeah, I'm just
with regard-
throwing this out,
Sure,
really.
and we could potentially reserve that for commissioner comments at the end, if you wanted to maybe hold on to that
Oh,
question.
okay. I'm trying to piggyback on his concern to begin with. Okay, all right.
I do have one other question. Perhaps you know the ordinance a little better than I do. My understanding, again, is we're at the whim of our appointee, our council person or mayor. There is no provision for removal for cause, correct? I mean, it's just, again, new person comes in, they don't like you, you're gone, or they want to put somebody else in. So, to me, I don't believe there's any removal for cause statements in the ordinance. Am I
Right.
correct? Thank you.
Yeah, actually, my questions revolved what Vice Chair brought up, and I was really hoping to see some data that backed, that showed the benefits of having a police oversight. And when I saw that in 2000 we had over 100, I thought to myself, surely there's got to be stats that said, okay, well, this is what the oversights that remained operating, what they were able to accomplish. And but yeah, I'm kind of disappointed to see that that's not something that's trackable, or you said that it's not being tracked.
So right now, we at one point, NACOL a few years ago had a database that was available online, and people could actually download it into an Excel file or an SPS file for academic researchers. But I am not a technologically savvy person when it comes to building behind the scenes or the back end of databases. Something in there required plugins, and the plugins were no longer available. And so we actually have, that was a way that we kept up with what are the oversight agencies out there. Since that broke, I think maybe, I don't even know, a year to 2 years ago, we have not had accurate information. We have been working with an IT professional and hope to have that database up and running late summer, early fall, because it is vital information. And for anyone involved in oversight, I think it is going to have helpful information as well, just on a practical level. Because if we can get all of the oversight entities to upload what their ordinances, their working, procedures for investigations, or worksheets that they have, or checklists, mediation program information, then that's a resource that anybody could go to at any point in time, available 24/7, and actually it's going to be an interactive database. search for jurisdictions of similar size, or search for entities that are just review focused, or search for entities that have an investigator. And we'll be able to see which filter out by, you name it, various different characteristics, and see how many of those agencies exist in the US, and also have access to their documentation. So we recognize the value in that, and we have been trying to get that up and running as soon as possible later this year.
I had another question. Have you heard of an oversight that they decided to disband because they felt like they met the goal? They did a good enough job and they felt, okay, we don't need this oversight body anymore.
I have not, no.
Okay, those are all the questions I had. Commissioners to my left, any other questions?
No questions, but staff, please let me know if this more falls under the comment section. But I think one of the metrics that I had, one of the things that I have brought up at a previous council meeting is perhaps for the commission and city staff to track the dollar amount of settlements and legal claims that we settle regarding police misconduct. Both the cost that takes to pay do those payouts, but also the internal cost of city staff time and all that comes with that. Because I think I'm guessing one of the issues, Ms. Barr, in terms of assessing effectiveness of police oversight commissions is that there might not be like clear set universal metrics on how do we assess that, correct? Yeah. And
Absolutely.
so I think for us, we have an opportunity, since we're starting from zero, to be able to keep track of that. So maybe 5, 6, 7 years down the road, we are able to look back and say, have the number of the dollar amount that we have paid as a city decrease, perhaps as a result of having a civilian oversight commission. And with that same note, I think I had asked for data of the previous 12 years in terms of that cost, so we can truly have a historical understanding of when the commission started, previous 10 years of cost, where the commission started, and then now where we could be 10 years from now. But I think that will be my comment. But Ms. Barr, I definitely will appreciate, in terms of if you keep us in your mind in terms of as Nicole is navigating through figuring out how to assess effectiveness of police oversight, that if you could share with us anything that might be helpful for us as well to keep track of that measurement of success. But I do agree in terms of the transparency and trust that the community needs to have with this commission in order for us to be effective, but also to be able to, many ways demonstrate that there is a viable, a legitimate option for residents to be able to raise concerns about police misconduct. So, but thank you so much, Ms. Barr, again for your time.
Can I just add one thing I realize that might give you some context? It'll be quick. So with you hit it on the head, the metrics, there's not a standard way of knowing which data collect, and every entity and police department and oversight agency, there's no standardization. And so there are some groups of people who are members of NACOL who have recognized this and are, I guess, an informal working group to try to get some standardization. It is a challenge because of so much variation between oversight entities. But the bigger picture, I think I wanted to just point out. So NACOL, it's been around since 95. You saw this is our 30th year we're in now. But for the majority of those years, up until a couple years ago, there were no staff. This was a member association. And so anything that was done related to oversight was accomplished by a very active board of directors and then association members who worked on various committees. And everybody already had jobs, full-time jobs. But I think that speaks to much credit to everyone who was involved in NACOL for all those years, just on a volunteer basis, getting the work done. It's only been within the last couple years. Well, Cammie has worked, our executive director, in some part-time capacity for a number of years. However, it was only until last year that I was hired as well as a part-time admin assistant. So now we have 2 full-time staff and 2 part-time staff who are doing a lot of work to try to get things into place that before there was no staff to get things done. And so we've got a lot of issues related to oversight that we are trying to tackle and trying to make happen. And the getting standardization and among data collection so that we can start to have data that can be used for comparison purposes and to determine whether or not jurisdictions have been successful in different ways. That's on the plate as well. So along with that database that we're trying to get up this year, we're trying to at least get the ball rolling on the standardization of data. And I just point that out because I just realized a lot of people don't know, like having staff and actually people working as a part of NACOL is brand new. And so we're even in the stages of, getting a lot of procedures written down, and we're doing a lot of great work, and a lot of great work has been done, but there's a lot more that is on the agenda to get done as well. So I just wanted to point that out to give you kind of a broad context. We don't have like, 10, 20 staff. It's 2 full-time.
Thank you, Ms. Barr. One last comment that I'll make, and I guess I'll address this to the commission. In the context of everything that has been said, I think it would be good that we try to set some goals for ourselves, kind of like a baseline, something that we can compare ourselves with in the future, so that way we can see and I guess measure our own success and our own effectiveness as a commission. One thing, like you mentioned, Commissioner Perea, was some of the lawsuits that we've faced in the past, and perhaps other statistics. Probably that's something that the commission should really look into and set some goals for ourselves. But unless anyone else has any questions, Ms. Barr, thank you so much for the presentation, and really appreciate it.
Yeah. And I thank you all for inviting me and your attention and also your questions. And I will follow up with the jurisdictions with the ability to hire, fire chiefs of police, as well as impose discipline.
Thank you. All right, so that concludes that work study session. And we are going to move on to comments, starting with staff comments. Do we have any comments from staff?
Thank you, Chair Vega and the commissioners for tonight. This was some good training. We will continue. Just to kind of go off of where we're at and kind of, I know we've had a couple of requests out there for some statistical updates as it relates to use of force. Specifically, the academic measure of the percentage of arrests that result in a use of force. We are still actively working on that. We are looking to compile that data backed by FBI statistical information that's provided. Once we have it, we will bring it for you to share. Also, for us, from the police side of things, training perspective wise, we have essentially officer involved traffic collisions and pursuit training blocks that we can probably do in one day of training for a meeting. We also want to spend an entire day on the internal affairs process and what Santa Ana PD does and how we do citizen complaint investigations. I'd also like to encourage the commission to kind of formulate your groups, your 2, 2, and 3 groups, to start scheduling our hands-on simulator training. In talking to our training staff, Sergeant Brandon here, we can accommodate the training, like I said, so we avoid any Brown Act violations. So 2, 2, and then a group of 3. And it's really up to your schedule. We'd like to, have you guys at our place for 2 hours, put you through several scenarios. It gives us a lot of time to be able to engage, ask questions, really get a deep dive into some of those life and death and quick decisions that our officers are encountered out in the field. And so we would recommend 2 hours, but if you only have an hour of time to give to us, we can accomplish the training in that period as well. So you can go through Assistant City Attorney Martinez to, kind of schedule those things out, and they'll work directly with me and my staff to facilitate that training for everyone. So thank you.
Yes, Chair Vega, Commissioners, I'd like to make just a few comments based on, I think, some of the comments that were made up here on the dais with Ms. Barr's training. I think preliminarily, I'd like to just point out the fact that the complaint portal for the Police Oversight Commission has been live for, it's probably close to 2 months now, maybe a month and a half. Also, we've separately created a link on the actual police website that links to the Oversight Commission complaint portal. So it is located in two areas now of the city, the main webpage, the police webpage. To my knowledge, because I am a direct recipient of those, the city has received no complaints through either of those portals yet about anything, let alone police misconduct. So I just want to assure the commission about that. Separately, I don't know if this happened before last meeting, but all active lawsuits that allege police misconduct have been forwarded to this body separately, so you should all have access to those. At the last meeting, I had offered that if any commissioners wanted to reach out to me to try and agendize an item, whatever it may be, policies, the lawsuits, the active litigation, I will be honest, is going to be a little tricky because there are a host of privilege issues that would apply, but we could still find a way to work around and potentially have some sort of discussion about those. I encouraged anyone in this commission to reach out to me, and that I would work with staff to agendize some of those items so that we could have robust conversations to the extent allowable by law on those topics. So I'm just putting that out there. Just please remember there are avenues to, and let me back that up really quick. Also, I should point out that the independent oversight director resumes or applications, if you will, the proposals are currently being reviewed by council. That's another aspect that is going to allow this body to have more teeth, if you will, and have the ability to dig into cases and conduct investigations. It is the hiring of that independent oversight director. Those proposals are currently sitting with council right now and are being reviewed. So all that being said, I just want to assure this commission that this is not just training only. There are other aspects and avenues by which this commission could be and honestly should be effectuating its purpose. And so to the extent anybody has questions, anybody wants to talk, I will provide you my cell phone. I'll provide you my direct line to the city. You all have my email address. Please reach out to me. Let's have a conversation about it.
I do have one quick question on, is the link to the complaint form on the My Santa Ana app, which would be a wonderful thing?
I'm sorry, Vice Chair, did you say the My Santa Ana app?
Yes, the My Santa Ana app.
No, I don't know that it is. And to the extent it's not, that would be a great spot for it to go.
That would be a great thing because, and it should be, and don't bury it someplace because quite frankly, if you don't know how to use the app, it's hard to find some things. So if you can make it, its own little icon, I think that'd be a great thing.
And these are the types of, I'm really glad that you brought that up. These are the types of input and recommendations that we want to hear from this body. If there's a better way to get this information out, we want to hear it. And we want to make sure the community has the ability to access it. So I believe it was Chair Vega's recommendation last session that that the complaint portal not just be on City Hall's website, but it also be affixed somewhere within the police department's website. I reached out to staff and staff was amazing. They updated that link probably within hours. So all of these things are helpful. We want to hear your input. We want to hear your recommendations.
Yeah, again, like I say, it should be its own icon, and if you can put a little banner at the top that says it's there, I think that'd be a really good thing, because a lot of people do use that, and I use it myself quite frequently, and it's a great app, so thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair, those were your closing comments. I'm just kidding. If there are no other comments from staff, we're going to move on to closing comments from the commission. I'll start to my left, Commissioner Said.
Thank you so much. So I did review the active lawsuits that we were given, and my, I guess, suggestion to the city attorney's office is I hope that motions to dismiss have been filed in some of them. I'm noticing a trend with some complaints where it seems like it's a copy and paste, and they're very vague. So whatever causes of action you can get rid of from the start, I hope that the city attorneys are doing that. Something else that's kind of an issue in my neighborhood, graffiti. So I did take a look at the statistics on graffiti. So I guess from July to September of 2023, there was over 700,000 total square footage removed of graffiti in the city. And then if you look at the police efforts, there's 0 arrests. So I guess I'm just not understanding why there's so much graffiti and then no arrests. And I don't know how many units patrol a beat, or if you guys use beats, I'm not sure. But it would be nice to see more police in my neighborhood to stop the constant graffiti.
I'll address just brief. I think I can speak to the motions to dismiss. We certainly do file motions to dismiss. We filed demurs. I actually on, was it Tuesday? Or no, maybe it was Monday or Tuesday, I argued a first demur to one of those complaints. It was sustained with leave to amend. So that individual will likely be refiling, but yes, we do. The city attorney's office does actively pursue dispositive motions to lawsuits that we feel do not have merit.
Thank you.
And as far as the police action and graffiti, so a lot of the difficult part about graffiti is it happens late in the night, and usually when someone discovers it, the criminals or the taggers, if you will, are long gone. There are times when officers are out patrolling, they are proactive, they will make arrests, but usually what happens when they're making those arrests, they're linked to some other crime. They either have drugs, weapons, some sort of gang indicia, and so the graffiti arrest might take a backseat because we're going to charge someone with a gun crime. They had a gun per se, and so maybe that might be the reason why you're seeing kind of an underreporting of graffiti. But to the extent that we can increase patrols, I will pass out my cards to everyone so that you can, each of you, send me emails as it relates to any issues that you might have in your neighborhoods that require some attention, because we have various units, and we'd be more than happy to help out.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Ask a question. You do remember the program that we used to have with the graffiti, where we used to have a regular officer, not that you're a regular, but an officer that would read the graffiti, what they were saying to each other, the different gangs, and they would know who they were. And so the police would go into the classroom, because they knew where the kids were, go into the classroom, pull the kid out, take him down to jail, call up the parents who were working to come home from their job and get that kid out of jail. The one who, what's the word, when you discovered, I guess, the graffiti and reported it, and such as an example, the kid was found, the graffiti artist was found, got $500 reward. And that happened a couple of times to one of our city people who used to be quite active. And whatever happened to that program? Did it not work that well? Did it go by the wayside or what? I know you don't have the officer that used to have. She was a young woman who used to read all the gang messages on there.
So our officers do oftentimes try to read and interpret the graffiti that's on there. Graffiti has kind of shifted over the years. Traditionally, back in the day, 10, 15, 20 years ago per se, it would be your traditional gang members who would essentially be in a turf war and they'd write their moniker on a wall. A rival gang member would come in, cross it out of disrespect, and that's kind of the back and forth that would happen between gangs. What we're seeing today, and for several years now, is there's been a morphing now. Now, they're not your traditional gang members who are doing it. It's now tagging crews. And you've seen it on the news where these taggers gain notoriety by their moniker, but more importantly, where they place the graffiti, how extreme can they be when getting that graffiti up, and so the crime of tagging and putting graffiti on display has changed and shifted. Not to mention, as far as I think I remember the program that you were talking about, but schools have also kind of shifted the way they treat individuals who potentially might be involved in crime. And so law enforcement is somewhat limited into how we can address juvenile criminals as it relates to crime. And so our hands are tied at times with what we can do. So we're trying our best, and we will enforce graffiti crimes when we're able to do so. But like I said, the laws have changed and made it a little more challenging for us. But again, that doesn't mean you can't call us, you can't tell us that you have an issue, and we can try to dedicate resources to see if we can curb, find out who it is, and prevent further graffiti.
And if you notice that the graffiti seems to appear more when school is out, say Christmas vacation, Easter vacation, that's when it starts appearing again, because the kids are out of school. Okay. Do you all remember when I asked a little while ago, and I was told to button it until this time of the meeting? Here's a perfect example. If we meet, in my opinion through education too, because I've been in that for many years, the more you meet, or the sooner you meet, you're going to remember what you heard or learned from the meeting before, instead of stretching them out to just once a month. Here's a perfect example. We have no meeting in May. Is that correct? That's what we've been told. There's no meeting here in May. So that's 2 whole months, I'm saying, that we don't meet. So I hope not everything we learned tonight, which was wonderful, is all going to go by the wayside. Okay. So why is it we can't meet more than say twice a month? That way we would get our training done faster, and it, I think, would stick with us, a lot easier, I think, and better, instead of being so, so far apart all the time. That's what I see, and that's my opinion, and that's my question.
I can respond to that,
Okay.
Commissioner. The ordinance only sets forth the floor, and the floor for meetings is that they shall occur at least once a month. To the extent that this body would have a majority vote that would increase the frequency of the meetings, that is a possibility. I think it just would need to be mindful of schedules, conflicts with regard to either room 1600, which we've been in before, or here, because we have to accommodate technology, and there are quite a few other commissions that are also meeting too. So I think there are some practical aspects that would go into a larger frequency than once a month. That being said, it's not impossible, but it would require a majority vote by this body, because if you recall, and I don't know if it was the first meeting or the second meeting, probably the first meeting, which I did not attend, but the dates that were set, the frequency, that was all voted upon at the inaugural meeting, if you will, of this commission. So if we were to revise that, it would require a majority vote. It would require a motion. It would require somebody seconding that motion and then a vote.
Can I make a motion? And see what the rest of you think?
Let's go ahead and go around and see what comments the other commissioners have. Maybe they can address that.
Pardon me? Maybe
And
what?
maybe they can address what you just said in
Okay,
their
all
comments. Commissioner Mejia?
Comments about the meeting or comments in general?
In general, and if you want to comment on what Commissioner Goransky mentioned.
Well, and I should point out another procedural aspect of that. We would have to put that on the business calendar. So that needs to be agendized. And then we would have to then, at that point, when it's on the business calendar, you can have your discussion about it. And then we can actually vote on it. If that's the way the commission feels that it wants to go, you could do, the motion would be seconded, and then there would be a vote. So if that's something you would like me to put on the calendar or on for the next meeting on the business calendar, I'd be happy to do so. But would you reach out to me separately and I can do that?
Okay, now are you asking me personally?
Sorry, I'm asking you personally, Commissioner.
Is that something we can even do at closing comments?
Probably not, and that's why I just suggested, I have suggested kind of an open dialogue with me, either again, via my cell phone, via my office phone, email, anybody can reach out to me and we can have these conversations and we can talk about getting something agendized.
I guess I'll just say this, that I feel like going down the route of asking all the commissioners what their availability is so we can call for special meetings is probably the best route. That way we don't have to wait a meeting to agendize this and then vote on that. And then even then at that, we're still gonna send out a survey regardless. So I feel like special meetings might be the best route. That way we don't have to re-vote later on to go back to the once a month regular meetings for the police oversight.
I will also just point out that there is a ceiling on how many times we can meet. I believe it's 4 times per month. I was just saying that there is a ceiling on how many times we can meet, and it's 4 times according to the ordinance, if I'm not mistaken. Per month. Per month. Per month.
Okay, Commissioner Mejia, go ahead, sorry.
It's okay. But yes, I'm on board. I'm open to having twice a month. I travel a lot, but as long as I'm in town, I can attend the meetings. So I have a couple of comments, but I'll try to keep them brief. In terms of the graffiti, I encourage us to be, I guess maybe set better practices on discussions if we're going to be suggesting for policies that are rooted on research. Especially it can be a bit harmful to kind of go back to antiquated policies that have been proven not to work. And one of the reasons why there's been a huge push for a lot of the juvenile justice reform. So just for all of us to be more mindful about that. And also, even though it's probably more nuanced and annoying to see tagging, it's probably much more cost effective to just clean it up or try to change behavior than to arrest someone and take them in. That doesn't really change behavior and it costs the city more money. So on both ends, not effective. I do want to bring up the conversation about earlier, which I didn't think was suited given that it wasn't a question, about the effectiveness of the committee. I think that given the presentation that we just had about legitimacy, asking the very much question of the effectiveness or existence of the committee, given that it already exists, kind of is counterintuitive to bring legitimacy to the oversight committee. And so moving forward, I think that when we think about metrics, I think as someone who's done benefit cost analysis and does data analysis, we need to really be asking the right question. So for example, if we want to look at effectiveness, the effectiveness of the committee, just like Dr. Bard mentioned, is procedural justice, which is not, if we want to reduce or have different outcomes, that's fine, but it has to be rooted on what the capacity of the committee is and not on things that are out of the committee's control. So just things to be mindful about. That's all.
So a couple comments. The first one, thank you, Assistant City Attorney Martinez, for reminding us of the procedure to agendize discussion. I think with that said, I think has been a couple of requests from different commissioners to have different data sets or different data being forward. And I know that we received those via email. So, but I think a discussion about some of those items will be very helpful. So I think I'll be contacting you regarding potentially later down the road agendizing some time for us to have a presentation from staff on the different data sets that we're asking. So that way, one, we can all receive the data, but also the public can understand that data as well, and for us to engage in a conversation. Ultimately, I think where my intention is to be able to have understanding of the different costs of lawsuit settlements, the different response of police time, things for us to be able to analyze and understand and have a conversation about policies that we can recommend. So that is something that I'll be contacting you at some point to have those type of presentations here. So I really appreciate that reminder. Another comment that I have in relation to the presentation that we had today, and part of what I was asking about the different levels of power that this commission and this oversight body has, is that I believe that the ordinance can be strengthened. And so I'm hoping that we have a conversation as a commission down the road in terms of recommendations we can make to the city council to strengthen this body based on the trainings that we're receiving, and as we start hopefully reviewing cases down the road. But I do believe that the ordinance could be strengthened, or if necessary, be taken to the voters for certain changes of the charter. So that's something that I'll be bringing up at some point as well. But those are my comments. And yes, I think if we're all available, I think we should definitely meet 2 times a month. Thank you.
Vice Chair, have you gone?
No, sir, I have not.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I do think legitimacy is extremely important. I think we do need to have some strength in the ordinance that does outline a term of service, because again, we all get swept away with the new council person, and it all starts over again. And to me, that just, again, brings in questions of legitimacy. Special meetings, I think, are a great idea. I think it avoids a lot of the procedural issues you just described. And again, thanks for the training. It's very informative, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
So just briefly, in response to that, what I plan to do is I am going to agendize for the business calendar a discussion regarding an amendment to the meeting frequency. The discussion does not have to be long. It doesn't have to be an hour long. It could simply be each commissioner weighing in on whether they think 1 is enough or 2 is better, or whatever that may be. And then at that point in time, when the commissioners have all spoken and shared their perceptions and their opinions, we can put it to a vote. And we may be entertaining sub-motions, other things like that, but we can put it to a vote at that point in time. So I will make sure that concept is agendized. And maybe it can even just be also something to consider too, is that maybe that's a temporary stopgap measure for training purposes, because when there actually is, the meat and potatoes to be reviewed, maybe at that point in time, it would be better served to go back to a once a month frequency. So just concepts to consider for when we have that discussion.
Would you be able to also send out a survey so that when that item comes forth, we can have an idea as to when, maybe even at that time, start choosing a second date?
Yes, I can take care of that.
Great. Vice Chair, did you have any more?
No, I think that's good.
Okay,
Thank you.
Commissioner Castillo-Latson?
Yes. Well, first, I just want to thank everybody for being here, for putting on the training, and just for, taking time out of their day to be here. I don't really have very many closing comments. I do want to echo what Commissioner Mejia said about accountability and metrics. I'm all about accountability and making sure that we're doing a good job as a commission, and having some sort of benchmark by which we can gauge whether we've made progress. But I do think that we need to be very careful about how we go about measuring that. Just thinking as an attorney, I know, some of us have suggested maybe using, the number of police dollars that have been paid to settle lawsuits, or, metrics of that sort. The issue or the concern that I have with setting a metric like that is that we don't know what those figures would be in the absence of the police commission. And so what I mean by that is, the figures might go up from, what they were last year before the commission, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we didn't make an impact, because those figures might have been higher than they would have been in the year that the police commission began operating. And so that's just something to think about, is that it's potentially difficult to track some of those metrics, or to track our influence on some of those metrics. But in general, I think, it would be good to have some sort of gauge that we could measure ourselves against.
Okay, so I'll give my closing comments. One request that I would like to make is that we have like a police oversight commission flyer, something that we can perhaps include when neighborhoods have their neighborhood association meetings, a flyer that kind of introduces who we are, what we're about, our purpose, and then in it, maybe even have the link to where they can file complaints, something so that it becomes part of the packet that neighborhoods receive when they have their meetings. That would be one suggestion. And then the second one we already spoke about. I guess my closing comment now, which is I would like to just encourage the commissioners to ask any questions that they want. I don't think any commissioners should have the right to ask or tell commissioners what kind of questions they should be asking. And I think every question is valid. So having said that, I will, with no further business before the commission, I hereby adjourn this meeting. The time is 7:51 p.m. Please note that although the next meeting of the Police Oversight Commission is scheduled for May 9th at 5 p.m., city staff plans to cancel that meeting and instead schedule a special meeting on Thursday, May 16 at 5 p.m. at City Hall. You can visit the city website, santa-ana.org, to subscribe to agenda notifications and to check the meeting schedule. Thank you, and I adjourn this meeting.